I wanted to do a brief lecture on the McLuhan video, which is only about a minute and a half, 2 minutes long. You really should check it out. And it's your second reading, and it has to do with this idea of narcissus, narcosis, and this very interesting and perplexing notion that McLuhan puts forth that um, media are extensions of our body. However, when those media come to extend our bodies, we are numb in a way uh, by the kind of fascination with that particular extension. And so we don't recognize the kind of loss or what he calls auto amputation of uh, of our of our sensorium, right? So I'll just go through this. McLuhan, and these are the test questions, by the way. So I'm just this is this is a lecture that focuses specifically on the test questions, and I think I'm going to be moving in that direction. So McLuhan says the things you make, they mimic you, although sometimes it's hard to see the resemblance, right? And the examples I use are how cameras mimic the eyes, fork mimics the fingers, the bicycle in a way, or the automobile is a kind of mimic of running or the feet or something like that. And indeed, it's kind of cementing this notion that the technology is an extension of our body in some way, of the sensorium. What does the word narcissus mean, right? And remember that. So there's this concept of narcissism in a sort of psychological vein, which is only things that matter to us exist in the world, that we're the center of the universe kind of thing. And there's a myth, the Narcissus myth, and Narcissus fell in love with his reflection, even though the nymph Echo tried to kind of shock him out of his enthrallment or his trance, and then he fell in the water and he drowned. And so McLuhan makes this point that the Narcissus myth is really about media. It's not right how we sort of play. He didn't realize that it was him in the reflection, and how, like, I mean, we can kind of think about a mirror as a sort of fascinating technology, as a sort of extension of our eyes and our identity. So, and as I alluded to before, Narcissus was drugged into thinking that the image outside himself was somebody else, according to McLuhan. He didn't like fall in love with himself, he fell in love with an extension of himself, right? And you could see this in the kind of ways that media transform our identity and how they're image implicative on social media, that we put forth that which we want others to see about us, right? We tend not to put forth negative aspects of our identity. So it begs the question, who are we authentically? uh, in our technological gadgetry and gimmickry, we don't think it's merely a part of our own physical organism out there. We are like Narcissus, completely numb. And so we just don't recognize that's the whole point. We don't recognize the extension, right? Even though the media are extensions of us, our bodies and our minds, we don't realize it because there's a kind of McLuhan-esque numbness that takes place. Very interesting, right? When we put out a new part of ourselves, extend a new part of ourselves, what do we do? Uh, and McLuhan says we numb that area. And so you could see this as an example with this sort of distance education, and how there's all this sort of care and concern about having everybody get on board and learn everything, because the shock would be too extreme if it was just like throwing people into the deep ends. And so the idea is these technologies come into our lives, we don't really recognize what they're doing because there's a sort of narcosis or numbing to whatever sensation they're auto amputating, right? Um, however, our traditions and our sort of modes of being, right, our ways of life are changed forever.